Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and today we're going to talk about environmental toxins and how they impact our brain and bodies. Now, this is an issue that I think that a lot of parents don't really consider in relation to their child's developmental kinds of issues or mental health symptoms, but it's a really important link to understand because the things that we're exposed to in our environment, in our homes, for our kids at school, in the environment in our communities can have a major impact on brain development and also just our functioning in general. So I'm excited to have as my guest today, Beth Greer, and she's going to talk with us about how toxins in our homes can impact mood and behavior. Let me tell you a little bit about Beth. She is the supernatural mom, and she's a sustainable and toxin-free living expert and award-winning journalist who eliminated a sizable tumor in her chest without drugs or surgery by detoxing her body and home. She's author of the bestseller Supernatural Home, endorsed by Deepak Chopra and Dr. Joseph Mercola, and named a top 50 health and environmental journalist to follow. Beth offers personalized in-home detox audits to identify and eliminate toxins, and her work is endorsed by several doctors who recognize that toxin elimination equals better health. She offers Detox Your Home webinar courses and 5-day Group Detox Cleanses. I'm so excited to have her on the show today to talk with us about this important topic. Welcome to the show, Beth.
Thank you. So great to be here.
So you've got a really fascinating personal story related to how you got into this whole realm of understanding the role of toxins in health, in neurological functioning, all of those kinds of things. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's been about 17 years now, but I thought I was leading a really healthy lifestyle. I exercised, watched my weight. I even had a meditation practice. I didn't smoke. And so I developed this pain in my shoulder that turned out through an MRI, discovered I had a mass in my chest. It was the size of a tennis ball. It was pretty big and very painful. I got it biopsied and they said it was benign, but they needed to come out. And I went to 3 top surgeons and they couldn't agree on how to access this thing. One wanted to cut me under my collarbone in the front. The second one wanted to go under my armpit. And the third one wanted to remove one of my ribs from the back. And I just thought, this is insane. Let me just, slow down here for a minute and figure out what I can do and why this occurred in my body, because it was so strange that it sort of came out of nowhere, it felt like. Mm-hmm. So I started looking at first what I was putting in my body, and I realized that I was eating out a lot and, not really paying that much attention to my food. I thought I was eating healthy, but healthy, is different for everybody. Everybody's body is different. So I went on a cleanse. It was I went on to, down to a place called the Optimal Health Institute down in San Diego, and they put us on raw juices, raw vegetable juices, organic. And in just 3 days, I started noticing the pain started diminishing. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. What's going on here? So I noticed that my body started feeling better, and I continued there. I was there a week. And then I came home and I decided to continue this cleansing of my body using just organic vegetables, mostly a little bit of fruit. And while I was doing that, so I thought, okay, what's happening here? And the word came to me that simplify. I was simplifying what I was eating. And I was taking out all the foods that are inflammatory. I had been eating wheat and processed food, things like that. And then I remember thinking, well, what else can I simplify? And I was putting some lotion on my skin, and I looked at the bottle, and on the label, there was like a paragraph worth of ingredients. And I just thought, whoa, and I couldn't, read half of them. And my background is a journalist. I went and got my master's in journalism at NYU. And so I put my research hat on. I started researching all of these chemicals and their impact on the body and brain and how fast they get into the body, which is so interesting because our skin, it absorbs very quickly into our bloodstream, everything we put on there. So I switched out to all natural. So I put like coconut oil, and I'm using baking soda as a deodorant, for example. And then I thought, well, what else can I simplify? And I was cleaning, I was spraying with Windex, spraying some countertops, and I looked at the label on the back. Most people don't read their labels on household cleaners. They're maybe good at reading food labels, but household cleaners. So I look at it, it says precautionary statement, hazardous to humans and domestic animals. And I thought, well, whoa, this is interesting. Okay. These are toxins in here that I don't want in my body. And so I switched out to using hydrogen peroxide and white vinegar and baking soda to clean with. And so it took about 9 months of this sort of cleansing and clearing away of all the toxins that the pain went away. And then I had the tumor scanned and it had disappeared.
Wow.
So, about 6 months later, I had it scanned. So yeah, it disappeared. It was a huge wake-up call to me that our bodies are self-healing. And if we don't gunk them up with all the stuff that we're being exposed to on a daily basis. So, this was my message. And so I started writing articles for the San Francisco Chronicle. I had a column there for a while and then turned it into my book, Supernatural Home. And it's broken up into 3 parts: what goes in us, what goes on us, and what surrounds us. It's pretty simple, and it's all filled with solutions. And that's the takeaway message, that start to take a look at these 3 areas and pay attention to some of the nasty chemicals that we're exposed to.
Such a remarkable story. I mean, amazing, really, to think about, the health condition that you had, and then your journey of figuring out, kind of unraveling the pieces that were connected to that. And I think, what strikes me in listening to you talk about that experience is how much we just take for granted that the things that we are buying, the things that we're using, that these are safe and don't pose health problems. That really struck me in listening to that. I mean, so let's talk a little bit about that, because most people think, hey, if this stuff is available on store shelves, if these cleaning products, these personal care products, ingredients in our food, then that means somebody's determined that they're safe, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. And that's the big misnomer, that everybody thinks that they've been tested for safety and they have not. And that was a really eye-opening thing. So, for example, the cosmetics industry is self-regulated. They can throw whatever they want in there, and they do. And so, the makeup that we buy, at the department store, for example, has a lot of awful things, including mercury and mascara. This is a heavy metal that we don't want in our bodies. So it's really important to buy clean, safe products. So, for example, I like Beauty Counter as a makeup. And on my website, BethGreer.com, you can find a link to it, and you can see it's not like just putting smashed avocados on your face, but it's makeup that works, but it doesn't have the nasty chemicals. They have something called the Never List, and there's probably 20 chemicals that most, Revlon, Estee Lauder, all these are using, but Beauty Counter is not using it. So that's my go-to makeup. And again, start looking at your deodorant, for example. I go into people's homes and help them figure out what's going on. Sometimes they have mystery illnesses, and especially children who are hyperactive and all that. And so, but I remember going into the store with a client and they wanted a stick deodorant, and we looked at Tom's thinking it was natural. Well, the number 2 ingredient on it was propylene glycol, which is found in antifreeze, believe it or not. So something like baking soda, which is what I do, I put it in a salt shaker and sprinkle it on my palm and put it, under my armpits after shower. You're good for the whole day. Some people like to put it in a little container, and then they take a makeup brush and they can dip it in and put it under their armpit. It totally works, and it's the simplest thing and so inexpensive. You don't have to spend a lot of money on expensive deodorants, for example.
Right. So many simple swaps that we can make once we understand that we need to start looking at ingredients and things. And I love how you separated that out, and you said you talk about this in your book, the things that go in us, the things that go on us, and then the things that are around us. And I want to have us talk about maybe some things in each of those categories, because while many people are more aware now of the impact of food, on, health, behavior in their kids, those kinds of things. I think these other areas of the things that we're surrounded by, in terms of cleaning products or personal care products, it's a big one. And I've really seen in the clinic over the last 20 years, kids who are outwardly extremely sensitive to some of those things, and then kids who maybe it doesn't seem like things like perfumes or, cleaning products or things bother them. But when we move those away and get some safer, better options, they do better. But I can think of several kids just off the top of my head who outwardly were having very, very negative reactions, emotionally and behaviorally to things like, I'm thinking about one young man, his mom's hairspray. It was very, very, very perfumey, very heavy. And
Right.
that was a huge trigger for him in terms of the smell, the toxicity. So, important for parents to recognize that sometimes it's as simple as, looking at some of the things that we're surrounding our kids with and making switches and things like hairspray or stuff like that.
Right. And scent, I'm really glad you brought that up, because when you see the word scent or fragrance on a label, it can mean there's at least 100 synthetic chemicals. I met a chemist recently who told me that he did some research. He found over 400 chemicals in that one fragrance. It's unbelievable. So if you think about, you're putting hairspray on, then you're using scented deodorant, and then you're using maybe some perfume, and then you're spraying, with an aerosol, scent, or cleaning with scent. Imagine all those chemicals, and the little bodies, are really affected deeply. And so household cleaners, surface sprays, in particular surface wipes, you want to make sure it's unscented. And I know some kids, like teenage boys, for example, love to use Axe deodorant spray, Axe body spray. So toxic. It's and it impacts their hormones, that they're not, I remember I spoke in school to a group of 8th graders, and I told them about, I told them about scent, and then I said, well, how many of you here use Axe? And a bunch of the hands went up, and I said, well, those can really they can mess with your hormones. I said, you know what, hormones can make you short and fat. And so the next morning I got a call from one of the moms at the school. She said, what did you say to my son? He threw out his Axe spray. So sometimes you just have to talk to the heart, right?
That's right. Get it right.
What's important to them.
Right.
But yes, it's huge.
It's a big deal. And let's talk about some things that go in us. So let's talk about a couple things related to food, because I know you're big on advocating for parents, for families to look at reading labels for lots of chemicals and things that may be in foods, but particularly food additives. Talk about what food additives are, why parents should be aware of those in their kids' food.
Okay, so food dyes in particular, they've done studies, scientists have done studies and given children artificial food dyes and noticed that they have temper tantrums even in normal children. So if your kid is suffering from ADHD or autism or whatever, and then you're adding the food dye, and it's really exacerbating it. And so food dyes can be found in children's medications like children's cough syrup, vitamins like Flintstone vitamins have food dyes in them. The blue yogurt tubes, you just start to look at the labels and not buy those colored items. And
well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, and I know, I'm sure that in the research that you've done, you know a lot more about this than I do, but, I'm aware that even in other countries, like in Europe, they ban some of these ingredients. Like the foods that we are allowed to sell and purchase here in the US, the same brand of the same item over in, Europe, for example, has very different ingredients because they recognize the connection of this and they don't allow companies to put those dyes.
They had banned it for a while, but now what they're doing is, I'm not quite sure why the change, but they are labeling it. So they do say on a product that has artificial food dyes, they can say can cause, emotional distress or whatever in children.
Okay.
So, but I do know that when I was in the UK and I looked at like Kraft macaroni and cheese, they colored it with annatto, which is, a natural substance. We're here, you know, it's red dye number X and yellow dye number 43. So yeah. And then the other, I want people to really become aware of glyphosate. It's an additive that, so glyphosate is a chemical that is found in Roundup. It's a weed killer. And it's very toxic. It's one of the most popular weed killers in the world, basically. And scientists, you know, there's over 100 studies that have shown that it's very, very damaging to us. And so what parents need to know is, you know, glyphosate will be in non-organic food, but also they're spraying it on wheat, on non-organic wheat as a drying agent, a desiccant. So if you're buying your kids, you know, like I used to do with my daughter, a little goldfish or anything that's not organic, they're getting a big dose of glyphosate. And it's something to really pay attention to because it really does impact the brain and the whole nervous system. So it's something you really want to avoid.
Mm-hmm. And that's been linked to cancer and things like that. Like I'm aware of like a large lawsuit recently over particularly workers who are out spraying these things and cancers. And so we're not talking about just a theoretical concern here. We're talking about people really getting sick from this stuff. Absolutely. And there's a bunch of doctors who are getting behind it. And so there are ways to help remove glyphosate from the body. There's a urine test to kind of measure your levels of glyphosate that if people are interested, they can contact me and I can direct them to that. It's not that expensive a test, non-invasive, and then there are ways to get it out. So there's that. And then, the food dyes, and then preservatives are another one that can be problematic. And those also are banned in Europe. Mm-hmm. So BHT, BHA, if you see like mold retardant, things like that on the label, you just want to avoid it. I remember I used to do show and tell kind of talks where I would bring food items to show people, you know, what's in this box of cereal or what's on this loaf of bread. And I remember I had this loaf of bread with me. It was not in my refrigerator or freezer. It was in my pantry. It was there for 8 months. And there wasn't a speck of mold on it. Wow. So I looked at the label and it said calcium propionate. And then I looked that up online and it said causes ADHD behavior in rats. So, you know, if you're buying bread, and the bread is like, Pepperidge Farm has it, and Safeway bread, all these, you know, common breads that people think are okay, but you really want to avoid calcium propionate as an additive or preservative. Very toxic. So people should be reading labels. And one of the things that I say to parents is, if you're reading things that it's hard for you to read, like these are not things that you would cook with, or you have no idea what it is, then it's probably some sort of toxin or ingredient that is not necessary for the body and may actually cause problems. Right. Yeah, that's a good advice. I know people don't like to read labels. It's a hassle, but I think you have to start to get used to that idea. And, it's time consuming, but your health is important. And if you can find some things that possibly are triggering your child's behavior or skin conditions, children will break out. Very often it's just some of these additives that are the culprit. Right, right. Let's talk a little bit about farm-raised fish, because I know this is something that you also, educate people on and make recommendations for. So, people might be thinking, fish, that's a great healthy thing, trying to get more fish in my family's diet and in my kids. I know there's benefits to that. What should they watch out for with that? So that people should know that farm-raised fish, they're fed, they're not out in the wild, they're not out in nature, they're not foraging for themselves, so they're fed fish food. And it's generally or not organic, right? So the farmers are feeding them soy and corn, which is genetically modified, because about 90% of the soy and corn crops in this country are genetically modified. So you've got those two elements. And if your child does have a soy allergy, they will pick it up from the flesh of that fish. So you think that you're avoiding soy, but meanwhile,
you're really exposing them to it through the fish, because we are what our animals eat, basically. So we need to understand that. And the other thing that farmed fish are fed are growth hormones to make them fatten them up quicker, and also antibiotics, because they're in these containers that they can breed diseases. So they're given anti-parasitic drugs, and they're also given food dyes, food coloring. So especially if you're buying salmon, if they're just feeding salmon the corn and soy, they're not going to turn that beautiful orange color that we all like. So what do? They give them food dye. Isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. So that's what we're ingesting. So it may taste good, but there's like a secret, ingredients going on in that fish that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, so from a health or a nutrient density standpoint, fish that are farm raised like that don't have nearly the health benefits for us as fish who are, in the wild the way they're supposed to be. But then also there's the toxic element of what they're putting in these fish and the feed, all of that. And I would assume then that some of that same argument goes then for any of the kinds of animals that we might consume, whether it's, beef, chicken, pork, those kinds of things.
Oh, same thing. They're all fed antibiotics, growth hormones, all that stuff. Yes. And they're also fed, most cattle that's raised in these confined environments are fed corn and soy. They're not fed grass. And then if they're not raised organically, are the farmers spraying the grass? Let's say they're grass fed. Are they spraying the grass with weed killer? Are we getting the glyphosate through that? Mm-hmm. Same with dairy. So you want to look for organic. It's really important.
Right. So organic is something important that parents can look for on a label. Are there things that can simplify this for parents? Or if they're thinking, oh my gosh, I have to be in the grocery store, how do I know what's good, what's not good? Are there some things on labels or some things that parents can watch for to know, okay, this is going to be a better choice? So if it's labeled organic, for example, is that a good indicator that there's, a reduced amount of toxins in it?
Yeah, there won't be glyphosate for the most part on organic produce. I would shop at farmers markets. Places like Trader Joe's and Walmart's and Costco have organic food now. You can look for that. So there's no excuse, basically. And you can grow some of your own herbs in a little window box or little planters. You don't really need a big garden to do it. But yeah, organic will guarantee you that it's that there's no genetically modified organisms, and it's not going to have glyphosate, it's not going to have pesticides, that sort of thing. So you're pretty safe there. So yeah, I would say that. And at a farmer's market, sometimes they're not certified organic, but if you talk to them, get to know them, they'll tell you, we don't use sprays, or they just haven't bothered to go through the process of getting certified, which can be expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you said, there's not really an excuse anymore. I mean, this has gotten markedly easier in the past several years, especially with more and more companies and consumers becoming aware of these issues. I have found that there is a lot more available now, even in some of those mass market grocery stores that you mentioned, in terms of organic things, than there used to be. So certainly consumer demand, it seems, is driving for more of these food companies to produce things that at least there's options for organic.
Right. I mean, I was blown away. I went to Costco recently, and they're just, they had so much organic produce.
Yeah.
So it was lovely to see.
Awesome. So that covers some things for parents to be aware of in terms of toxins and the things that we put into ourselves and our kids. You touched on some personal care product issues, things that we might put on our bodies. You talked a bit about deodorant, cosmetics. What are some things that parents should be aware of there? Because as I think about kids, we've got stuff that we're bathing them with, maybe things in clothing, in toothpaste. Like, there's actually a lot of things that we put on kids' bodies, even though they're not wearing maybe cosmetics and stuff like that yet. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, sunscreen. I know a lot of parents are slathering their kids with sunscreen, so you want to make sure you buy the safest type of sunscreen. I have those written, listed in my book. I even have a recipe for making your own sunscreen with vitamin C powder, and it totally works. Even on fair skin people, it doesn't allow you to burn. So, and then, yeah, anything that, so like, I know, like most children love getting into a bath, but I remember I went into one woman's home and she said, my kid screams and hates the bath. And I said, well, let me see, what kind of soap are you using? And she had this bubble bath that she thought was great. The child was allergic to it, and that's why he was screaming. His skin was burning. It was awful. So, yeah, pay attention to the things that you use most frequently, like if you're putting lotions on, or if your child is still in diapers and you're using wipes, you want to make sure it's the most gentle, without fragrance, for example, would be, without preservatives and all that stuff. So bubble baths.
Yeah. It's a really important point. It's just when you were talking, it was reminding me of a little 7-year-old girl that I worked with a couple of years ago who had pretty profound tics. And parents had done a lot with cleaning up the diet and things like that. But as I got to know them and talking about different things that could be impacting, exacerbating the tics, one of the things that I discovered is that she was doing a ton of sunscreen, and these tics were getting a lot worse in the summer too. That was another, clue of what might be going on. Tons of sunscreen all day long at the day program, the summer camp that she was at. She was going in the chlorinated pool multiple times a day, and then putting lotion on after because her skin would get so dry. And what we found is that her toxic burden just from personal care products during those summer months was huge, much more increased than the rest of the year. And then washing the hair more frequently because of the chlorine, and even the things they were putting on to try to mitigate the dry skin, it was all making it worse. And when we cleaned all of that up, her tics dramatically went down then in those summer months. But it's like that buildup effect of maybe a lotion by itself isn't that big of a deal for a kid, but when you've got all these different things going on, it can really build up.
That's true. And there's something called the body burden. And, this is what doctors talk about, that with all what you're saying, you have so much input with all these chemicals from everywhere. It creates a huge burden on the liver. The liver is the detoxifier. And so if it stops detoxifying, we're just, become a toxic soup. So, it's sad. But I think once people understand that toxins are source or the root cause of many of this, then they can take steps to clean things up and have a healthy life.
Yeah, and again, I think there's so many more products available in the personal care arena than there used to be. It's not difficult now to even go to a Target or a Walmart or some of the mass stores and find at least a few options for things like bath soaps and shampoos and toothpaste and deodorant and things, that do have safe ingredients in them. And I know it's a big deal for us personally as a family. I have a son who has really, really bad eczema, and we have to be very mindful of not only what goes in his body, but what goes on it. And so over the years, I found it's getting easier and easier to find options, and certainly then online there's lots of options too. So are there things on the labels that people should be watching for, like free of certain ingredients, free of dyes, or what kinds of things could people look for that might be?
So parabens are a big one, but here's my caution is that sometimes you'll see paraben-free, but then they're putting in something else. And just like BPA-free water bottles, bisphenol A has been found to be an endocrine disruptor. And so manufacturers have kind of been hearing from people, we don't want this in our product. So they're now putting labels on that say BPA-free. But what people don't know is that the manufacturers are substituting BPA for BPS, which is just as toxic, but they're not talking about it. No one is, nobody's really explaining to them what the problem is. So use glass containers, for example, or metal. But in terms of the things on the personal care products, again, look for fragrances. You don't want that. You don't want nanoparticles. That could be problematic. things like propylene glycol. Sometimes it's just called PG, or something called PEG, polyethylene glycol. Anytime you see these letters like DEA or MEA, those are definitely things you want to stay away from. And petroleum products, byproducts, those are, from mineral oil. Those come from gasoline, basically. And then triclosan, I want to just mention, because that's found in antibacterial soaps, and doctors say that it's just best to use plain soap and water. It works just as well, and you just want to stay away from the antibacterial products, because they can be skin irritants and cause problems as well. It's just unnecessary.
Yeah, that's a great point. We, could do a whole episode on just how over sanitized we've become and how that's a big problem for our gut and everything else. But yeah, I think avoiding that triclosan and just any of those antibacterial kinds of products is great. Let's touch just briefly, because you alluded to this in your story at the beginning about household cleaning products. You talked about Windex and realizing like, oh my gosh, this has a warning on it that it's not safe for people or animals. So obviously reading labels on those things, what are some simple things that parents can use or should be looking at on labels, or maybe things that they can use that are safer to clean with so that our kids and our families aren't exposed to all these chemicals through cleaning?
Right. Yeah, so when I go into homes, I'll look, and so I went into one woman's home who they eat all organic, 100% organic. Meanwhile, she was cleaning with Clorox wipes and a Swiffer, which is highly fragranced, and the whole family were on antihistamines. And so we got rid of the scented products, and, I got her to use baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, white vinegar, simple things. They clean just as well. And I have some recipes in the book. It's just, clean. They say 99.9% Windex, but this same thing. You get the same amount of cleaning power, and you're not going to be poisoning yourself. So yeah, that. And I wanted to touch on mold a little bit, that many of my clients have been exposed to mold in their homes, and that can be a huge trigger for so many things. It can exacerbate all kinds of illnesses. And so if you've had a leak in your home, you don't disregard it and think it's not important. One woman who, she's very intelligent and very aware, but she said, she saw this sort of black area in the corner of her carpeting, and she would just cover it up with the drapes until it got to the point where it started to smell. And that smell is a true giveaway, you've got mold. She just didn't want to deal with it. And this, we get busy, it's overwhelming, I don't want to look at it. But if you see black stuff in your carpeting or on your ceilings, or if you've had a leak, you really need to deal with it quickly. Get it measured. There are tests that you can do on your own. You don't have to hire expensive firms to come out. People can contact me, and I can tell them how to get these little test kits. They send them to you. The lab will send them to you for free, and then you can test. And then I think they charge you around $130 to get a report. And one woman's home I went into, I smelled the mold as soon as I walked in, and she said she doesn't smell anything. That's what happens after a while. You get acclimated.
Right.
And I told her she needed to, I thought it was bad enough, and anyway, she got the test results back, and sure enough, very high levels, and she wound up moving. But so there's that. And the last thing I wanted to mention was electromagnetic fields, to pay attention to that and unplug your Wi-Fi router at night when you go to sleep. And what I've been doing is actually unplugging everything in my bedroom when I go to bed now. Lamps, everything. It just creates a very peaceful environment. And so often we have so many things plugged in. I didn't even realize I had 2 lamps, an air purifier, a diffuser, charger for my cell phone. It's like, whoa. And then when you unplug it all, everything just sort of gets very quiet. And because even though it's turned off, there's still a field there when that plug is in the wall.
Yeah, and that can create toxic effects then in the brain and the body. And especially, I think kids are especially sensitive to this stuff, whether we're talking about, the EMFs from devices, which is why I tell parents no devices in the bedrooms,
Right.
or if a kid does need one in their airplane mode, at night and susceptible to mold, you're talking about that. And I'm thinking about a little guy I was consulting on recently who parents had seen all kinds of practitioners. They were doing everything right. And this kid's behavior was getting worse. His respiratory problems were getting worse. And it turned out the building they had moved into had a leak. And like you said, it wasn't until they started seeing the black specks show up on the ceiling above the kid's bed
Oh,
that they realized something was there. And that was really key for him.
yes.
Getting that remediated and getting him out of that bedroom just made a world of difference. So it's all these things that we don't necessarily think about or realize, but they're a big deal, I think, especially for kids, because their bodies are just smaller and they're more susceptible to the buildup of this stuff. And it really does impact them, not just physically, but also neurologically and in terms of their mental status and behavior.
Right. And I just want to add one other thing about that. It's important to get all the things out of the bedroom, the devices and all that, but I want people to start thinking about what's on the other side of the wall of where they're sleeping, because I can't tell you how many homes I go into and the crib is, next to a wall, and I have a meter and it measures a very high field, and the other side of the wall is a refrigerator. Or another home, another side of the wall, they had their Wi-Fi router right next to the kid's head, and it goes through the wall. It's not like, it's going to be blocked right there. So, something to think about there. It's an important, easy thing to start to pay attention to.
So many helpful things that you have brought our awareness to, and given for people to be able to just take a look around their home and the things that they're using and start to think about what they're putting in, on, and around their kids, and then some simple changes they can make. So super helpful. I want to make sure that people know where they can find you online, because you've got a ton of resources and things available there.
Great. It's just go to bethgreer.com, Greer. If you get on my mailing list, I won't bombard you with things, but I do have some great information, and I teach a course every quarter or so on how to detox your home. It's a 4-session course. It goes into detail on all the areas that you're in, on, and surrounds. And I also do group cleanses, for adults on just 5 days of eating real food. There's no potions or lotion, potions or powders. It's just eating unprocessed food, no dairy, gluten, sugar, and people have had remarkable transformations. They've given up their sugar cravings. I mean, I'm surprised even that only 5 days can make such a big difference, but it doesn't. It's fun to be in a group. So I'm going to do, I'll have one in the spring, and then I'll do one fall and winter again. So
awesome.
Yeah.
And your website has such a great wealth of resources and things for people. So I really encourage our listeners to check that out. Beth, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your expertise and practical suggestions. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Great to be with you.
Okay, everybody, that's it for this episode. We'll see you next time.